Head over to patreon.com/MWilliamPhelps and sign up for my free content page, where I'll be interacting with you, doing live streams, posting exclusive content, and dropping a major limited series podcast exclusively for Patreon members. That's patreon.com/MWilliamPhelps. patreon.com/MWilliamPhelps. Everyone adores you. Nobody has a bad word to say about you. You have a very successful career in medicine and 2 beautiful children. One morning, as you show up for work, someone steps into your vehicle and fires 6 rounds into you. Your ex-husband, a captain in the local police department, has an alibi. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the true crime author of close to 50 books. I've dedicated the past 20 years of my life to helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. In 1974 was a watershed moment in American history, with President Richard Nixon resigning after the Watergate scandal, but also the same year that Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's home run record. I was a very small child, in grammar school, enjoying the wonderful world of not caring what was going on anywhere else besides my own little bubble of Matchbox cars, G.I. Joes, Hong Kong Phooey, with the biggest decision on my plate being what metal lunchbox I was going to choose. $6 Million Man, Partridge Family, or, if I was lucky enough to find it, Bruce Lee. Margo Schamberger was 18 years old in 1974, just a year away from becoming the valedictorian of Central Howard High School's 1975 class. It was right around this same time when Margo met an older guy, Doug Prade, 10 years her senior, himself on a fast track in law enforcement to becoming a high-ranking officer. Margo was such an overachiever then, so smart. She entered an accelerated bachelor's program at Kent State University and wound up with her medical degree from Northeast Ohio Medical University by 1983. That is a feat of educational prowess very few could achieve. It says a lot about the character of such a wonderful woman, as does choosing to go into primary care as her vocation. Doug and Margo, despite the age difference, seemed to be on a romantic fairy tale path leading them down the yellow brick road to the American dream. Margo, a doctor, preparing to start her own practice, adored being a wife after she and Doug were married in 1979 and relished becoming a mother, soon having 2 daughters together with Doug. In his own right, Doug is no slouch. At this time, he is on his way to becoming the first African-American police captain in Akron, Ohio's police department. I've spent some time in Akron working on a book about a wealthy Akron socialite, a former beauty queen runner-up with 8 kids who started an affair with a man who was later murdered by her other lover. And this woman's husband, by the way, was a big-time restaurateur in Akron. So, in murder, I think my point is here, it doesn't matter how much you have, or your status, or who you present yourself as to your community. When people decide to kill and cross that line of sane thinking into psychotic thinking, nothing else matters. Murder is, in other words, a very narcissistic crime at its fundamental core. Akron is an interesting city with a certain degree of the good old boys club network of men and a police department routinely facing its own struggles and cliques. That being said, Doug becomes a captain of what is a large department, and he vows to get in there and make some change. For Margo and Doug, however, seemingly living a happy life, Margo is the primary breadwinner, allowing them what has been described as a higher standard of living. Margo is one of those doctors going above and beyond, her life's mission being to help people any way she can. She is active in the community and will go on to accept numerous community awards for her service. The medical practice Margo runs in Akron begins to thrive, and Margo and Doug settle into a nice life in Akron, between them both bringing in about $200,000 annually. Things seem to be going well as the 1980s end and a new decade is on the horizon. But look, as all of you know, what neighbors, co-workers, and family sometimes see is the best a couple has to offer, with the true nature of the relationship only coming truly alive behind closed doors. Many couples develop two personalities, public and private. They smile and hold hands and appear happy at cookouts and social functions, and then close the door when they get home, fight, and go their separate ways. Margo and Doug, by the early 1990s, had been married for over a decade, and as Margo's mother, Lily Hendricks, later explains, Margo would confide in her that the marriage was cracking. There were issues, big ones. Margo began to tell her mother that she feared Doug. This was a surprise. Doug is a respected captain in the police department. He's the guy upholding the law. But when Margo goes to her mother and describes how one day Doug had pushed her head, in her words, way back, and with his other hand, he pushed her nose in, kind of like squishing her, this was a serious accusation her mother took note of and began to worry about. There was another time Margo's mother actually witnessed for herself when Doug said to Margo, "You fat-faced bitch, nobody wants you." That's abusive, that's harsh, and that's mean. Why would Margo want to stay with someone treating her in this way? The night Doug said that, Margo heads to her best friend's. She's upset and crying and scared. Margo's friend, in fear for Margo's safety, tells Margo, "You and the kids need to stay with me." But Margo decides to try to work things out. They've been married almost 15 years by now. That has to count for something. The kids are still young. Now might not be the right time. Things then become second-level concerning when Margo is out with friends one night and Doug shows up. Not to join them or tell his wife something she needs to know, but to stalk and watch Margo, stare her down, and even take pictures of her. It's kind of creepy. "You need to go to the police," her friends encourage Margo. But Doug is the police. What is it she can do? Doug is a captain. The guy has serious pull inside the department, a department which has had its share of scandals involving cops, I'll say. By 1993, Margo is seriously weighing whether or not to stay in the marriage. It's becoming all too consuming, stressful, and even dangerous. She's a doctor. People depend on her. she doesn't need to be worrying about going home or going out or walking on eggshells all the time around Doug. So she goes to see a lawyer about a legal separation from Doug. Not a divorce, her lawyer asks. No, I want you to draft a separation agreement, she says. So that is what her lawyer does. Several times, in fact. Why so many times? Because Doug would never respond to the separation agreement papers. He just completely ignores that this is happening in his life. Margo's lawyer advises her to proceed with a divorce, which is paperwork Doug would be legally bound to respond to. Margo says no. Every year after 1993, Margo would come in, her lawyer later says, and talk about how things weren't working out and what is it she could do. Her lawyer keeps telling her the only recourse she has left is to serve Doug with divorce papers. So in December 1996, 3 years now, Margo finally decides to go through with divorcing Doug. Things had not gotten better. In fact, they were far worse. By this time, Margo's lawyer says it is as if Margo became herself again. She begins losing weight, seeing a new man, and seems very happy, telling her lawyer that she is grateful and elated to be given the opportunity for a new life and starting over. Her relationship with Doug had been over, Margo tells her new man, since 1994, although she is still living with Doug in the same house. During that holiday season of 1996, when Margo files for divorce, she and her new man attend First Night in Akron. Margo's daughter is scheduled to sing holiday music. Doug shows up as well to support his daughter. At least that's what they think. Doug had never met Margo's boyfriend, and by all accounts, Margo didn't think Doug even knew she was dating anyone. But as they pass each other at first night, Doug calls Margo's boyfriend by his name. Then, later on into the evening, Margo's boyfriend sees Doug videotaping them. She never wants to talk on the phone when she's home either, Margo's boyfriend says later, because she feels Doug is always listening and taping her conversations. Divorce changes people. We all know that. And sometimes turns them into different people, at least for that stressful period while everything is going on. All of it, no matter who initiates the divorce, especially when long-term marriage is involved, is difficult. Margo is a kind, generous, caring, and loving human being who has gone above and beyond to try and make things work with Doug. But the marriage is broken beyond repair, and she knows this. It's far too late. Getting a new man, perhaps, is one way for Margo to prove to herself she can move on and begin that next chapter. On January 4th, 1997, Doug shows up at Margo's lawyer's office for a scheduled meeting. He walks in, and it's clear right away the guy is seething. He is very agitated and amped up. I bet you have no idea, Doug says to Margo's lawyer, that your client is going around and behaving like a slut. I can prove, in fact, that she is an unfit mother and that she is whoring around. I'll take the house from her, get spousal support, if that is what I choose to do. Mr. Bully, threatening them. That's who Doug is. It's clear from this monologue Doug delivers within minutes of being in the office that a few things are on his mind. For one, he is insanely jealous of the boyfriend. And two, he thinks he is in control of the situation. He says Margo will end up paying for his attorney as well. Then he says, I cannot afford one because I have spent all of my money, thousands of dollars, on having someone follow Margo. The lawyer looks on as Doug is ranting and raving, visibly enraged. It's as if all of what Margo has been saying about him, the lawyer is now witnessing for herself. Whenever I looked at Margo during that meeting in the office, the lawyer says, she had her head down and she was scared to death. Let's take a break here. Come right back. Margo is a beautiful woman, long flowing black hair, the warm smile of a doctor who is genuinely concerned about her patients. People love Margo. Her patients say she is doing exactly what she is supposed to be doing in this life, taking care of people. Doug sports a completely bald head, shaved, dark, thick eyebrows. He wears large-framed, round glasses and likes to keep his mustache very long, bulky, and perfectly groomed. He's in great physical shape and, forgive the stereotyping here, but he has that look of a cocky-ass cop. Within Margo's world, Doug has been a brute and bully over the past 5 to 10 years. As he sits in her lawyer's office, almost cowering to his tirade and name-calling and shaming, Margo's lawyer gets an idea of what they are now dealing with. As the divorce moves forward, Doug decides the best way for him to deal with it is not to respond. He never answers any of the court filings and fails to show up in court for the actual proceeding. And so the judge grants Margo an uncontested divorce in April 1997, along with support for her and the kids. But Doug will not leave the house. He refuses to move out, to change any part of his lifestyle, and certainly not pay Margo anything. After months of what is childish behavior on Doug's part, he finally leaves. It is a relief for Margo. At least inside her own home, she can now have some space. For peace of mind, she changes the locks and installs an alarm system, so there's a less likely chance Doug can come into the house whenever the hell he feels like it. Doug will not relent, however. He somehow gets the new key, probably, I would say, from his daughter's keychain. And he starts entering Margo's medical practice at will, generally at night. He walks in and spends 2 to 3 hours doing God knows what inside. It seems Doug has a free pass, being a captain in the Akron Police Department, because nothing happens to him. Whenever Margo goes out, Doug calls the house and asks whomever answers where she is and who she is with. If the babysitter refuses to tell him, Doug questions his daughters. One friend of Margo's, whose husband was in the Akron Police Department and knew Doug, says Doug had once grabbed Margo by the neck, called her a fat bitch, and said this, "I'll kill you." When Margo finishes telling her friend the story, her friend says, "Buy a gun and protect yourself." Margo then begins dating a new man. The relationship moves swiftly and becomes serious right away. They are in love. "We're planning on getting married soon," Margo tells her sister one day, in late 1997. We want to have children. Margo had tubal ligation surgery years before, but speaks to a clinic about getting the procedure reversed and even makes an appointment. In November 1997, Doug begins to act even more aggressive and irrational. He shows up at the clinic where Margo works and argues with her, ridicules her, bullies her. All of this in front of people. He will not let up. Margo decides to take it to court, sue Doug for additional child support and full custody of the kids. Then Margo and her boyfriend head out to Las Vegas to get away and also have her sister meet her new man. Margo is very happy and in a great mood, finally getting away from Doug and the entire situation. But when she calls home to speak with the kids, she is told that in her absence, Doug has been staying at the house with the kids. That's it, she decides. When she gets back, Margo is going to talk with Doug and lay down the law. She's done playing games. She'll take legal action if she has to. It's November 25th, 1997. Margo plans on meeting Doug to have that conversation. Another big factor adding to Doug's anger is that despite his unwillingness to pay Margo, she'd had the money deducted from his paychecks through the court. So Doug is in a terrible financial situation as the end of the year approaches. He's drowning in debt. On November 26th, Margo heads out that morning to start her usual day, which begins at the Akron Medical Center, where she conducts rounds before heading over to her office to begin seeing daily patients by 9:30 a.m. At 8:50, she calls into the office and speaks with her office manager. "I'm on my way," Margo says. She then phones a leasing company, and she leaves the manager there a voicemail. This is at 9:05 a.m. "What is the status on the car I ordered? Thank you." 4 minutes later, Margo pulls into the parking lot in back of her office. 9:09 a.m. She parks. A small car then pulls in close to Margo's van. A man gets out of the car and walks over to Margo's van and gets into the passenger seat. Margo appears to know the guy. Within 3 minutes, the same man exits the van and gets into his vehicle and drives out of the parking lot in a hurry. The CCTV showing all of this is grainy and blurry, and so it's hard to make out faces and any detail. But it's clear this man had waited for Margo to pull in. Margo's medical assistant, meanwhile, is inside the office, and by 10:15 a.m. begins wondering where Margo is. She has not shown up for her first few patients. Totally unlike her. By 10:25, the medical assistant is now outside, in back, looking around, and she sees Margo's van. But where is Margo? So the assistant walks over to the van and peers inside of it. And there she is, her body stretched over the passenger seat, clearly either knocked unconscious or worse. The woman runs back into the office and dials 911. As they wait for first responders, Margo's office manager and medical assistant open the van door to see if they can help her. What is immediately obvious is that Margo's pocketbook and all of her jewelry and her cell phone and even money is visible. So the idea that she had been robbed and beaten up isn't likely. Then they realize Margo has been shot. Her lab coat she is wearing is completely covered in blood, and some of the buttons are missing. Someone had come upon Margo and shot her to death. In fact, after an autopsy it's confirmed that Margo's killer shot her 3 times with a .38 Special revolver from a position on her right from inside the vehicle, then ripped open her lab coat and shot her 3 more times. One shot hit Margo in the head, killing her almost instantly. Then, strangely enough, the medical examiner notices that Margo's killer also bit her on the back side of her upper left arm. By 11 a.m., Doug Prade has been informed of what happened and shows up at the scene. He gets out of his vehicle, but is stopped before he can make it to the van. Hearing the news of what happened, Doug covers his face with his hands and drops to his knees, visibly upset. Several of his law enforcement colleagues later report. 2 investigators escort Doug into the medical offices. He's going to have to answer some questions and provide an alibi. I need to take my final break here, but I assure you, there are many twists and turns left to this one. Be back in a minute. Of course, Akron PD investigators question Doug right away. Where were you? What time? Can anyone vouch for you? The lieutenant from the Akron PD later says, he answered all of my questions very calmly, very clearly, very explicitly. Doug says he was working out. He left his apartment at 9:30 and spent 2 hours at the gym. Near the end of his workout, he received a page that there had been a shooting incident, and so he drove straight to the medical office. The one detail the lieutenant did notice when she spoke to Doug was that, in her words, he looked as if he had just stepped out of the shower, which could make sense, seeing that he was at the gym. But then why would he shower after getting that page? Wouldn't he just rush over there? A GSR, gunshot residue test, comes back negative. Later, the lieutenant says she had actually incorrectly administered the test. So there you go. Doug also says he doesn't want anyone within the Akron PD to speak to the one person he saw at the gym, a woman. He makes this clear. A month after Margo's murder, a life insurance policy she had taken out for which no one searching the house could find the paperwork for pays Doug $75,238.50. The total amount that Doug was in the hole for at the time of Margo's death? $75,000. There you go. They also find an abundance of cassette tapes on which they realized Doug had recorded Margo as far back as 1994 with a voice-activated tape recorder. Any call she had ever made from the house, coming in or going out, including patient calls. Then there are the witnesses, one of whom worked at a Dodge dealership across the street from the parking lot where Margo was murdered. Between 8 and 9 a.m. that day, this woman says she saw a tall, bald, black man with glasses walking toward the dealership. In fact, a salesman asked him if he needed help. He said no and kept walking past the dealership toward the parking lot where Margo was parked. That night, the salesman saw the news and eventually Doug's picture as being associated with the victim, and he knew right away it was the same man. So that places Doug at the scene near the time of Margo's murder. That guy, however, the salesman, never contacts police about this. It wasn't until after Doug had already been charged and was on trial that a colleague of his stepped forward and told police about what he had seen. When they asked the guy why he never came forward, the salesman, he says this: "I am afraid for my life. I know he's a police captain and likely has friends in the department." There you go. Then a patient steps forward and says he was in the parking lot being dropped off at 9 a.m. He had his blood drawn. As he was leaving, he heard a car peeling out and leaving the scene in a hurry. He describes a bald black man with a very thick mustache. He also picked Doug out of a photo lineup. Said he was 100% positive it was the same man he saw leaving the scene at a very high rate of speed. Other witnesses stepped forward and proclaimed seeing a guy fitting Doug's description in the parking lot near the time of Margo's murder. So what we have is motive, opportunity, and eyewitness testimony. Slam dunk. The woman from the gym is eventually found. She says that Doug handed her his business card one day after the murder and told her, "My ex-wife has just been killed. I want to provide police with someone who can indicate my whereabouts at the time of the murder." She and two others who were in the gym that day say they never saw Doug at the gym on that morning. So Doug Prade, in other words, is screwed. The FBI get involved after testing DNA. Remember the bite mark the medical examiner found? The FBI, at trial, testifies that Doug Prade has been excluded as the source of the DNA found on 3 different areas of the bite mark. The reason for this is based on the fact that there was so much of Margo's blood on her lab coat that any DNA would have been contaminated. So the exclusion isn't a lock for Doug by any means. A forensic dentistry expert then examines the teeth marks and ultimately testifies that based on Doug's teeth, the marks left on Margo were consistent with Doug's lower teeth. So Doug is convicted of murder and wiretapping on September 23rd, 1998. He is sentenced to life in prison. "I didn't do this," he shouts in the courtroom after the conviction. "You have convicted the wrong man." He appeals that decision. Between 1998 and 2008, all of his appeals are denied. But then, in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences publishes a paper saying that dentists are not able to identify perpetrators of crimes by matching dental patterns to bite marks on bodies. This becomes the break Doug has been waiting for. Enter now, in later 2009, Mr. Innocence Network guy, Barry Scheck. He argues a new DNA science, unavailable at the time of Doug's trial, will exonerate Doug, prove him innocent. The Ohio Supreme Court then gets involved. In 2010, a judge agrees to the new testing, a test specifically focused on Margo's lab coat. 2 years later, in 2012, new experts claim tests prove any previous bite mark and teeth tests are inconclusive. That judge then rules in 2013 that had these tests been available at the time of Doug's trial, the jury would have found him not guilty. She rules for a new trial and then orders Doug to be released from prison. He'd spent about 15 years by then behind bars. Doug steps out of prison and then, right away, claims a member of the Akron Police Department conspired to frame him. Another higher court kicks out the judge's ruling and says the previous judge erred in releasing Doug, but he is allowed to remain free. In July 2014, the Ohio Supreme Court sends Doug back to prison. Cue those applause, please. Doug's requests for a new trial have all been denied. Still not over yet, though. In 2017, Doug's continued requests are met on deaf ears. By 2019, the Ohio Supreme Court weighs in again, finalizing it all, declining to hear Doug's case a second time. After that, the Ohio Innocence Project drops Doug's case, citing the notion that they have exhausted all of their efforts. Doug remains in prison. Thank God. The guy is guilty as sin. Come on. Bite marks and DNA aside, motive, opportunity, and eyewitnesses all line up. The guy did it. He had even told Margo once, in front of people, he would kill her. That's it for this week. Be safe. Be aware. Sources for this episode include the 71-page State of Ohio versus Douglas Prade appeal judgment dated March 19, 2014. A timeline in the case against former Akron police captain Douglas Prade by Amber Hunt, Cincinnati Enquirer, July 6, 2024. Crossing the Line is executive produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, and Matthew Valentinus, Mom's Basement Management. Written by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Music by Epidemic Sound. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.